Hello, how's it going? So today, rather than tea, because it's a million degrees outside and I just went for a run, I'm gonna have a little gin and tonic. It's actually gin and passion fruit sparkling water. I hope it's not gross, but here it is. Bad better. Anyway, so personal news. I haven't been updating this regularly. I've been very busy lately, which is a complete 180 from the rest of my life before this. Um, so I don't know whether anybody's watching this or if this is just something that an alien's going to find one day and find out what somebody uh, was doing in 2020. I guess the most important news in my life for the last 2 weeks was that so it's 2 weeks Thursday, 2 weeks of like 15 days ago, my mom died, and as sad as I am, it's I've been going through a grief about my mother in one way or another over the last 8 years. I'd say. So 8 years ago, she had an aneurysm, which I understand is like your blood cell in your brain ballooning but not bursting, and stroke is when it bursts and causes all kinds of crap. I'm not a doctor. I'm an economist, so that's the way I was explained that 8 years ago. So you might want to find the definition elsewhere. So that happened. It's never easy with mom or any of us in our family. She had that aneurysm, and it was in the middle of a snowstorm, and the paramedics had to dig their way to my parents' front door in order to get her out because they had to put her on a gurney, get her out to the ambulance to get her to the the hospital. And so she was in the hospital. Geez, like she was in intensive care. She had brain surgery. God knows what they actually did to her. Um, and she was in intensive care. I think she was catching infections there. Apparently, this is something that happens a lot. I mean, we think about hospitals as a place to go when you're sick, but it's also a place to get sick. I suppose it's the best place to be when you're sick, but it's also, there's a lot of disease going around the hospital. And so, anyway, she was in intensive care. They kind of get her in a more stabilizing environment, and then she'd catch some infection and they have to put her back in intensive care. Um, and then eventually she stabilized, stopped getting the infections, and they put her into a rehab facility. And this started February of 2014, and by I think October of 2014, so that's what, 7 months, 6, 7 months. She was at home. She needed a little bit of help. She needed somebody to come around, help her do occupational therapy, which is occupational is more like your motor skills and things like that, like functional things, climbing up the steps, opening up a can of soda, drinking it. Like you'd think of this, you take this for granted, but it wasn't. It's not straightforward, especially if you're doing it for the first time. If you've ever seen a kid try to open something, it's going to be a mess. So anyway, uh, when she had the aneurysm and they said she's going into brain surgery, just I lost my mind. I was convinced that she was going to die. She didn't die. She made a miraculous recovery, and we got about 7 more years out of her. Normal mom. She was a little bit slow, slightly childish. She had changed. She had to stop work. I mean, she was of retirement age anyway, but I think she would have worked a couple extra years. Uh, but we got extra years out of her, and she was able to go travel a couple of places. She visited us up in upstate New York a couple of times. Came up to New Jersey when we lived there. Uh, Yeah, she had a few extra years in her life that we just weren't expecting her to have. And when my wife and I came back to America, so this was back in November of last year, so about 7, 8 months ago, we came back right around the time of Thanksgiving, and she was a little bit like on top of me because she hadn't seen me in a couple of years, and I was kind of like, Mom, I need some space because first of all, I'm jet lagged. It takes me forever to get over jet lag. But anyway, we had Thanksgiving, and the next day she has a stroke. Um, so that was pretty intense. I come upstairs to find her on the floor. She's kind of smiling, kind of like that. And I was like, this ain't right. So I put her in her chair, and she kept falling over in the same direction, kind of leaning on me. So I put her, propped her up, and said, come upstairs, Dad. Something's wrong with Mom. Call the hospital. I'm trying to get her to. Anyway, take her to the hospital. It's the only time I've ever ridden in an ambulance, which was kind of frightening. And yeah, they tell us that she had a stroke. She was in the hospital for a couple weeks. We ended up moving the next day because we had to move up here to Philadelphia because my wife had to start work in a couple of days. And so that was intense. And eventually they tried to put her back into a rehab facility, but she just wasn't responding. I don't think it was the right place for her, but I honestly don't know what a doctor would have done. I don't know enough about this stuff, but it was frustrating. And since I didn't have a job, I went down to Virginia to visit her fairly. I spent probably about the half of the last 6 months down in Virginia with my dad, going out to visit her. My dad's not been well. His knees have been playing up on him. He can't really walk around, so he's got a cane, and he actually, when my mom came home, they built this little chair lift that's sort of like like almost like a ski lift, but for one person that goes up the stairs. And they never did uninstalled it, but so my dad needs to use it now, which is like, it's amazing that that comes back in handy. So anyway, she she was in the rehab facility. She got coronavirus, so she had to go back into a hospital, and then she comes out, and then she had to go back in the hospital and come out, and it's just like, oh God, this is like not only like her last time in the hospital, but this is also like my grandmother, her mother, who was in the hospital, out of the hospital, in the hospital, out of the hospital. But my dad's 75 years old. This is a lot for him. He doesn't get around that much, and um, you know, it's a lot for me. It was a lot for him. Medicare and Medicaid process is not good. It's not good. If you think that that's going to save your ass when you're old, you're wrong. If you have any sort of problem, they're going to give you 100 days to solve that problem. And if that doesn't work out, all right, tough luck. So don't rely on it. It might get you out of a short-term jam, a heart attack, or a short-term problem. But if it's more than 100 days, you are screwed. So anyway, my dad had to refinance the house to pay for a lot of our medical bills. He ended up getting a fairly decent deal right before they started raising all the interest rates. And so 2 Thursdays ago, my dad sends a text. So we had this group chat between me, my dad, and my two aunts, which are my mom's sisters. And we were just discussing things. Like I would go and visit and send pictures, or sometimes I would call the group and just everybody can say hello to her. If she couldn't really talk too much, she would say hello and I love you and things like that. Like what matter? And often I would just go there and watch TV with her, read the newspaper to her. I don't know if she got anything out of it, but I think my presence was good. I hope. I like to think so. Before my mom had her aneurysm, we were very close, but not oppressively close or creepily close, but we were close. We would talk about things. I would say I was closer to her than I am to my father, but it's just the way it is. You just kind of favor one parent over the other, maybe. Um, so anyway, 2 Thursdays ago, they were sending her back into the hospital because she had shortness of breath. And we're like, oh, here we go again. So my dad, apparently they called my dad, but my dad was on the way to visit her, and he doesn't pick up the phone when he's in the car. So he shows up at the facility, the rehab facility, and they say, oh, we've been trying to get a hold of you. And they basically, she's been having shortness of breath. We called an ambulance to send her out there, but apparently the hospital where we're going to send her was full, but she's now at some place in Silver Spring, which is sort of the northwest of Washington, D.C. Um, and so they sent her out there. My dad doesn't have Google Maps on his phone, so he's like wandering around on the Beltway, like totally lost. And I was just like, now's not the time. I mean, after the fact. And so basically, she shows up. She's there for maybe 10 minutes, and she dies of a heart attack. And Dad shows up, and apparently he talked to the doctor on the way there, and the doctor said, yeah, she's not doing that well. Doctor didn't want to tell him on the phone that she had already died. So I didn't know what to do, you know. So he sent a text message to her. He's like, oh, she died as soon as she showed up at the hospital. I'm like, you know, yeah, I never thought I'd receive a death text message. You know, that's so weird. Now that I think about it, I didn't think of that, and it's just like, oh my god, you know, like, and I go through the whole like. But the thing is, I'd gone through the mourning process of her. When I've experienced her death, even though she never died, with the original aneurysm, with this last stroke, I'd experienced the shock of, my God, she's going to die. She didn't actually die. And I'm sitting there looking at her, and she's just not functional. There's a lot of medical stuff. I'll spare you the details, but she just wasn't responding to anything. So anyway, I think that a lot of these medical facilities are just completely understaffed. My wife, who's a veterinarian, they're understaffed. Everyone's understaffed. Any medical thing, they pay terribly. My heart goes out to any of these nurses, aides, and just anybody who works in a medical facility. They don't get paid enough for the nasty, nasty stuff they have to do. Cleaning up bottoms, piss, pus, infections, and they do it with a smile. These people need more money. I was going to say give them a medal, but I'm sure that they would just write more money. But it seems like a lot of the money is just being siphoned off by the middlemen. I know that you need a business person in the office, but it just seems like money's not going to the right people. But this is not an economic or business analysis video. This is a personal video. So anyway, my aunt's come down to DC. I was up here in Philadelphia, so my aunt picks me up on the way. She lives up in Lehigh Valley. She comes down here to Philadelphia, picks me up. We go down, and we just start cleaning up. Because my dad's not been able to clean up because he's just hobbling around in the house. And he just can't reach things. So we just have a thorough clean of the house. They end up getting rid of just about all of her clothes. My dad just wanted not a fresh start, you know what I mean, like new life, but just didn't want constant reminders that she's, if her clothes are still on there, almost like you're waiting for her to come home, but she's never going to come home. And he didn't want that. I understand that completely. You kind of need to almost like refresh the house where you're just not constantly reminded of that you're recently widowed. Anyway. So it was my job to arrange for the cremation, which is an interesting experience. If I don't say so, it's pretty funny. So this is what we do in our families. We laugh at death. Some people might find it disrespectful that we laugh about my mom and her death, but it's, we all love her. And I think the person who would have enjoyed a lot of this stuff would have been her, so it's almost like she's playing a little prank on us. So anyway, she I had to call. So we basically were like, well, let's just shop around. So I have find a list of cremation services in the area, and I probably called about 4 or 5 of them just to get a price. And I don't know what's involved with the cremation. I don't know how they pick up the body. I don't know what they do with it. I don't know. So I call up, and the first guy I get, I got the first one I get was this woman. I guess she was a woman, but she sounded like a little girl. I mean, she spoke like a woman, but her voice was like a little girl. And it's like 30. She said $3,800. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of money. All right. So I said, look, I'll call you back if we're interested. So I call a couple other places, and my aunt gets this idea. Well, why don't we look up on Yelp reviews? Okay. I never thought of thinking about Yelp reviews for funerals. We weren't going to do a funeral. She wasn't very religious. She was a lapsed Catholic, as the rest of most of the rest of my family, including myself. But she, um, so we weren't going to do any funeral service. So I called one place. It was called Northern Virginia Cremation or something like that. And so aunt finds it. She's like, she's doing it on her phone. She's like, you mind just looking at this on the computer because it's the mobile site's not working out that well. So I look at it, and then we're all like kind of huddled around it, and like, this looks like you're ordering something off of Amazon. It's a cremation. It's really weird, and it's like, the name of the deceased, whoever it is responsible. My dad doesn't really want to do this, so we're doing it for him. We keep typing it in, all the details. And I'm like, this just seems a bit fishy. So I know it's like, well, before we go any further, before we start paying for anything, I'm going to talk to these people because I don't know how this works. So anyway, I get somebody who's the funeral home version of Ernest P. Worrell. Remember Ernest? Ernest Goes to Camp. Hey, Vern, it's Ernest. Anyway, very sort of charming Southern guy, a little bit of an idiot. I don't know. That's just the accent. I'm not used to Southern accents. Living here in Philadelphia, living abroad, lived in upstate New York and Chicago. It's been a while since I've been to the South, and I guess in Northern Virginia you still have a decent amount of Southerners, even though it's Northern Virginia. They kind of go where the jobs are, and so anyway, it's funny how they have this sort of instinct. So I ended up talking to the guy. He's like, okay. And I said, I'm interested in arranging for a cremation, and I don't really know how this works. And he's like, okay. I won't do the accent. But he said, okay, what's the deceased's name? And I said, yeah, my mom. And he's like, oh, he's like, well, what's your relation to the deceased? I said, oh, she's my mother. I never know how to answer that because it's a mother-son relationship, right? So do I write mother or son, right? Because that's not a relationship. That's a noun that signifies a relationship. I don't mother son anyway, and it was like instinct, like, oh, my condolences, and it was it's like, how many times a day does he say my condolences? It's like, I know it's kind of, I know it comes from an honest place, but you never know whose toes you're going to step on. But it's almost like, instant. It's just kind of funny, and his accent was so strong. It was funny. I guess I have a little bit of, I have my own accent. But he said, well, what we do is basically you fill out the form on the internet. Yeah, that's right. You were doing the right thing. And what we'll do is once everything's been processed, we send out. It basically sends out all these alerts, and then we go and inquire about these things. We inquire about the hospital and say, we have the authority to take the body and cremate it. But apparently it caused some kind of kerfuffle later uh, because she died in Maryland and we were trying to have her cremated in Virginia. And apparently that's a federal thing. You know, you have to deal with the federal government and the rules about taking a body across state borders. But anyway, it was funny because we're sitting there and you can kind of, it's almost like a la carte cremation services. It was just kind of funny. We're like, do we want to buy? No, we're just going to scatter ash. Everything about this would just scream the Big Lebowski. He's like, we're just because we're bereaved doesn't make us saps. I just couldn't stop myself from thinking about that. But it's like, I don't know if a bunch of 60-year-olds and a 7-year-old would ever have seen that movie. And I just kept thinking about the Big Lebowski. I was like, I don't want an urn. I'm going to scatter her ashes in a couple of her favorite places. And she always said to me, oh, I want you to scatter my ashes here. And I want you to do it there and to here. And these weren't like individual cases. She had said it many times individually. But then I remember several conversations with her telling me, you're going to go here, you're going to go here, you're going to go here, and then you're going to go here. 4 or 5 places. I'm like, woman, I'm not going to, all over the world for you. But I guess I will. I agreed to do it. So I'm a man of my word. Anyway, so it's been a bit hard, obviously, as anybody who's lost their mom, who's been close to your mom, you'll know. Um, and I like I say, I've been dealing with the grief of this for a while, so it's I've lost her. I've lost a friend. I never really thought when I was a teenager I would ever be friends with my mom. I just thought it would be somebody I'd visit in, Thanksgiving and Christmas or the odd visit. But it's been tough. Uh, and just little things remind me of her. It's a thing that reminded me of a thing that reminded me of a thing. She had this thing for sheep, and anytime, and just the other day, I saw that, like if you have Microsoft Windows, they have this little screen that shows up and it changes like every other day. It'll just be a picture of a mountain or some kind of, an iceberg or something like that. And there was a picture of a field with sheep in it. And I was like, you visiting me? She was fairly superstitious. And there was a song, it's a pretty old song, I think from back in the 20s and 30s. It kept getting redone. So even into the 60s, it's called Pennies from Heaven. It's about like someone who, I don't remember the exact premise of the song. Somebody would be sending you pennies from heaven. You'd find something on the ground. I actually found one today on my run on the way back. So I thought, it's mom. But over the last couple of weeks, I've been finding money on the street. $1 here. I found $5. And I thought, my mom used to think that my grandfather was doing that for her. And I just tell her, oh, you're crazy. That's not happening, and things like that. And like, why didn't he send a winning lottery ticket? Why just pennies? Be limited by how much he can send. So I've actually been keeping the money. She has been leaving me on the street, and I've been giving it away to homeless people. I feel a little weird because my mom used to work in a homeless shelter in Philadelphia, and I remember one day she took me to the homeless shelter, and I guess in Northeast Philadelphia, at least in the 80s, there were not a lot of black people. It was a very white working class area. And even in Bucks County, there was just one. I didn't run into a lot of black people. Black people were something you saw on TV or you saw in Center City, Philadelphia, but you didn't see them in our neighborhood. There was no reason for them to come up there unless they lived there. And there was no reason for us to see them unless we went to where they lived or where they went. And it just kind of, it was some of the first times I saw black people in person. And I see them, and you see, my mom would explain to me that these people don't have homes. And that's really shocking to a child, especially if you live in a place where you don't see a lot of poverty. We weren't rich, but we weren't destitute. Um, and I would see them, and my mom years later would tell me that most of those people uh, are are there are certain reasons why they live there or they sleep there. One, there are, I guess you would call, hobos, right? They don't want to live a life like you and I do, where we have an apartment or a house and we live our life, we pay our bills, we go to work, and they just don't want to live because they want to be free. Um, Most of the homeless people are not like that. They're either drug addicts, alcoholics, or they have very, 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 they're crazy. They can't hold a job. They can't show up to a place every day at the same time and do the same thing. They can't keep appointments. They can't learn things like complicated processes that you'll have to do at work, like computer programs and having to email this guy. It takes a lot. And if you've ever dealt with learning anything like languages or dealt with people who have lost their ability to speak, like my mom, it's you don't really realize how hard it is to link everything together. So anyway, when I have a little bit of money, every time I even as the penny, I feel like this is not mine. And I always feel weird. It's like I don't want them to use this for drugs or booze or cigarettes, any bad behavior. And I always remember what my mom said about them. It's like you don't know who these people are, you know. So I haven't been home lately. I've been working a lot. I'll do that in another video because this one's going long. But I figure every time I go out in the city, I'm gonna buy a sandwich and give it to somebody who looks like they need it. So, I mean, I guess I've always wanted to be more like my mom. Um, and she used to give a lot of money, or she knew that a lot of them were drug addicts. So she found a way to sort of, I'll give them a little uh, Starbucks card so they can get a cup of coffee when it's really cold outside or a sandwich or something like that. But not pure cash because they could use it for drugs or booze or cigarettes and things that they just don't need. Um, so anyway, if your mom is still around, give her a hug.